Snatched from the Flames by Nathan Reynolds. This book is dedicated to the survivors, those wounded ones whose brilliant lives were snuffed out in the blackened flames of monotony, madness, and murder. It is the glory of Yahweh to conceal a matter, but it is the honor of kings to search it out. Proverb of Solomon. Foreword. The book you are about to read is a true story. It is published in direct disobedience to the family's orders. Some of the names, places, and dates may have changed. This has been done to protect the innocent. With that being said, those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will find a dangerous map hidden within. The format, chapter location, and structure are engineered to facilitate the revelation of this map. If you can decipher the text, use the clue, and follow the breadcrumbs, they will lead you to the golden-laden coffers of chaos, the perpetrators of perversion, and those sycophantic serpents hiding in plain sight. May each of you hungry hunters seek to expose truth, freedom, and redemption to all. I challenge every person who starts this book to read it all the way through. Read it carefully, page by page and chapter by chapter, until its final word. This book will not be easy to read. There will be a million reasons to quit along the way to its conclusion. If you endure the distractions, fears, and frustrations, I assure you of this, it will be worth it. For the words written within have the power to change your life and the lives of this world forever. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Unknown. Where do you begin a story that would take years to share? Do you start on the day they held you under the water until you thought you'd drown? What about the bitterly cold night when as a young child they made you kill a stranger? How about the time you were bleeding out after being shot and stabbed, watching death come to harvest your furious soul? Why not share what it feels like to tell your beautiful wife your past was a lie and the truth is filled with secrets of the darkest kinds? That waiting behind the cracked lid of reality is horrors, madness, and murder. I could tell you stories that would freeze the blood in your veins, turning them into petrified rivers of shock, terror, and disbelief. The kind of memories that squeeze the air from your lungs and leave you breathless, desperate to dismiss them as crazy fantasies. I don't think this book is for those stories. No, those stories will be whispered in the quiet to those who need to know so that they too can be set free. Freed from whatever it is they were made to do or was done unto them. Those wounded ones, those survivors of atrocities so horrible, most scream and wail desperately, denying they even exist. Denial can only keep you comfortable for so long. Soon the day will come when the houses of ignorance we've built our lives upon will come crumbling down. I assure you of this, there is such a thing as a radical, intelligent evil, and I was bred and born firmly into its clutches. But I was not made for those shackles of slavery, nor were those irons made to keep my soul from ever becoming free. As it's been written, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Through many love-filled but tear-stained experiences, I have come to know the truth, and it is because of the truth I write you these words as a free man. I write these words with free choice, burning a path of hope, which is turning the darkness of my past into the redemptive story of good redeeming evil. A story of light piercing the maddening darkness and revealing to the world that hope is waiting for all those souls held in prisons of destruction, despair, and death. We could start this true tale with the introduction, the acknowledgments, and Chapter 1, but I think instead it's best if we start much later. We will begin where I hoped it would have ended, but the boy meets girl and they lived happily ever after was never meant to be. Our story begins when in walked my safe harbor, the woman who held me tight while pierced hands of hope ripped me out of the underworld of secrets and murder. It was a world which sought with reckless abandon to drag me back into its poisoned abyss. Together their hands would hold on to me as ancient royal families who rule the underworld empires of beauty, bondage, and blood did their best to snuff out our redemption. Chapter 2, Our Choice. The water is at my feet again. It laps at my toes, tempting me to take a plunge. I see the face of this man of many staring back at me. We know more than we'd ever forgotten. The memories have come back in waves, breakers and billows big enough to capsize the cargo ships full of containers stacked 150 feet into the air. 1,000 questions are pummeling my mind. First and foremost is the fear of what I have to do. I have to tell my wife something she is not ready to hear, something that will bring those waves crashing down upon her. Will she leave me for what comes next? Will she leave me when she knows what I've done? She may have still loved me when I told her of the abuse and the fracturing of my personality, but she doesn't know about the blades and kidneys, needles and necks, and bodies buried in our past. She says she loves Jason, but she doesn't know what made us hungry to hunt monsters masquerading as men. I look at the water and I see the man of many. I see the man who is no longer afraid of who he is and what he had become. I see instead the face of a warrior who has known weakness is better than strength. It is a man who knows forgiveness is power over those who hate. For the first time in my life, a free man's eyes gaze back at me. I can choose. I can decide what will happen tonight. I have the freedom to hide and bury these secrets back inside. I have the freedom to accept who I've been and confess the secrets to my wife and find out if God's people love even murderers, liars, and assassins. Would I tell my wife I've been made to kill time and time again? Would I share my lists with this woman of innocence? Would I tell her about the people who'd seen the face of her husband before they met death? Would she ever see me as the same man? Would she still love me once she knew? Was there anyone who could love me once they know the truth? I could not wait any longer. I couldn't wait for a snuff film to surface showing me as a boy fighting another child to death with knives in dirt pits for sport and status. I couldn't wait for my young teenage face to be on the news as I was used by another brotherhood to kill one of their own. My family of blackmailers and extortionists had plenty of devilish darts in their arsenal, and I would not let them play me like the puppet I'd been all my life. I would not let the fear rule me anymore. I knew there was no way to escape this brutal underworld except through radical honesty and exposure to the light of redemption. Only on the surface could my broken heart find hope of rescue amidst the storm. I was no longer just a me, but a we, and we would do something that will echo through the halls of our heart forever. We left the path around the lake and headed home, the soil littered with pink pebble stones crunched quietly under our feet. With the sun setting over the horizon, we made our choice. We agreed it was the time to tell our wife who we are. It is time we tell her about Perello, the pit, about what we were to the Jesuits, the Brotherhood, and why the families had such an affinity for our ways. It is time to tell her how we, quote-unquote, earned our keep in the trade. Finally, my wife would learn about Blade, Jason, and my list. 8 years before my walk around the lake, we met her. She took a path down a hillside in the mountains that changed it all. The steps she took on a Wednesday evening would lead her to a smiling young man covered with scars. Some of those scars showed through the skin, breaches of my flesh, which offered the astute a glance beneath my pleasant veneer. Other scars, the ones which had cut the deepest, were hiding behind the walls only survivors can build. It was in those vaults of my soul where secrets, too dangerous to speak, were written in ledgers of regret. Before those secrets could be spoken, they would both need to become warriors for another way. In time would come a child who would save his shattered soul and show him a new life. Chapter 3, My Safe Harbor. She walks through the screen door. It cracks the ancient spring, biting into the well-worn grooves, dragging it back into its familiar resting place. She's got a hat pulled low, hiding her hazel eyes. She's wearing soccer shorts, a tank top, and flip-flops with a Hawaiian name I couldn't spell right. There's no heart-stopping our eyes met moment to relate. Instead, it was an introduction from one friend's friend to another. I had been leading connections at a church's college ministry and was preparing a feast. Every Wednesday, we had people over to a house on the creek where we fellowshiped together, ate pasta, and laughed. It was a temporary home to me, a man always on the run. She stepped out of her silver Crescent Honda and made her way down the hillside of a mountain town. Pink flagstone steps, quarried from just a few miles away, were nestled between branches of scrub oak, columbines, and black-eyed Susans on her way towards the house where I was waiting. I had always been waiting. All my life had ever been was waiting. hoping the pain would end, the sadness would leave, or the anger would flee. But that day, that beautiful April before the sun could set, she took the stairs down the path where she found a young man who would change the course of her future, and in her doing so would forever change mine. She said her name was Chelsea, and I smiled real wide as I introduced myself as Nate. She had flecks of green peppered through her chestnut brown eyes. She was beautiful. There was no hat big enough to hide that. And by every stretch of the imagination, this woman was entirely out of my league. She was radiance subdued, a once brilliant sapphire now lost in a dusty jewel box. Chelsea was a collegiate soccer player and a talented nurse, yet I saw sorrow in her soul that made me want to weep. In a moment, I could feel the hurt, the ache, and the angst. I didn't know her whys or her reasons for the tears waiting to be released, but that would come soon. Chelsea worked nights as a nurse at a hospital, and because of that, she and I would hang out for many of the weirdest hours. As our days of summer turned into weeks and then into months, this woman always befuddled me. I saw in her the character of God, and I wanted to share my life with this woman. Chelsea and I got to know each other as friends do, but Chelsea was never a woman I wanted to be friends with. Chelsea was the kind of woman I wanted to marry and spend every day of the rest of my life with. We languished in the awkward "what are we" phase of friendship for too long until I boarded a plane and flew to Afghanistan. It was on my trip to Afghanistan I learned that Chelsea was the woman I wanted to pursue with every bit of romance I could muster. I believe if ever a man is to court a woman, he must first bring two things: words of intentions and a marvelous treasure. I needed to return to Chelsea not just with words of intentions, but with a trinket in which she could forever see my affections for her. I have never been a man who could craft a beautiful Welsh love spoon or afford price-fixed slave-dug diamonds, and though I bought Chelsea a little silver ring in a jewelry store on Chicken Street in Kabul, Afghanistan, this was not the treasure I sought. I found the precious treasure in a palace guarded by fierce men with well-used and well-maintained rifles. Right then and there I decided I was willing to go to an Afghani prison to bring the woman I adored a treasure worthy of her courtship. Some of our time in Afghanistan was spent going around Kabul and seeing the wonders of this most ancient of cities. Kabul had more history than I could comprehend, and as we traveled through its streets, we crested a hill and saw the Darul Aman Palace. Once considered a marvel of the land, it now lies in bomb-cratered, bullet-riddled ruins after manipulated men let loose their rage on its monumental walls. Our team unloaded our vans, and we were told the story of the palace, the queen it was built for, and the treasure it once held in its ornate coffers. Chiefly among its wonders were the rose gardens and tiled mosaic fountains covering the grounds of the palace. Only by the piles of rubbles marking their foundations could we see the many fountains. While we walked around, the palace guards with their rifles held at the ready patrolled the perimeter. Looking at the crumbled fragments of one of the unique fountains, I saw it. I saw the treasure worth getting shot over. It was a shattered piece of a tile no longer than my thumbnail. Its handcrafted designs and intricate stylings had been aged, chipped, and scarred. I came up with a quick plan to get me under the razor wire surrounding the palace so I could snatch my treasure away. I studied the guards and learned their patterns, and we readied ourselves. Just as the guard turned to make his final march, I swung into action. Diving under the rusty wire, I scrambled over to the fountain and pocketed the prize. Just as I turned and started running back, I heard the guard's shuffling feet. Slipping back under the razor wire, I stood up on the other side of the fence as the guard rounded the corner. In my just act natural, out-of-breath, sweating out of every pore way, I kept my cool. The terror in my head convinced me that any second I would be shot in the back, but I was able to hold the fear down and keep my composure. It was not until our team was safely back at home did I look at my broken tile. It was unappealing in every way, yet marvelous in its uniqueness. My treasure secure, I began to write the words of intention to carry home to the woman of my dreams. Arriving back home after 35 hours of travel time, I was somewhere in between slightly exhausted and, quote, fall over I can't see straight, end quote, jet-lagged. While in this perfectly screwy, love-struck state of mind, I drove to Chelsea's apartment with my treasure and my words. We talked about my trip, and as we did, I began to try to steer a conversation to the story of the palace. Every time I did, I would forget the words I'd memorized. Stumbling and Bumbling in the most frustrating of fashions, I told Chelsea something like this. Chelsea, in all my life, God has shown me things of great wonders and majesty. I've seen these things in caves hundreds of feet below the surface of the earth, and on the sides of mountains miles in the air. I have marveled at them in ways I thought impossible, but in all my life, I have never seen such a marvelous treasure of worth as I've seen in you. I've seen in you a character so rare, a heart so sincere, it makes me lose all sense of understanding. In you, I've seen a graciousness that is divine. 7 days ago, I stood in the splendor of the Queen's palace in Afghanistan, and even as I marveled at the ancient palace, I thought only of you. I thought of you because I long for you, to get to know you, to become known by you, and to share my life with you. Standing among the rubble, I've found the most extraordinary piece of tile I've ever seen, and I brought this to you. I give you this that you may know I treasure the woman I've gotten to know, and I would treasure infinitely more getting to know the woman you'll become. Handing her the tile, I asked her, Chelsea, will you be my girlfriend? Cue the doves, the church bells, and the choir. She replied, well, I will have to pray about it and think about it. Silence filled the void as my jet-lagged brain desperately pleaded with me to understand the words she was saying. I realized there would be no celebratory hugs or high fives waiting for me at my apartment. Driving home, I knew Chelsea was still the woman I wanted to pursue, and if God were generous with me, I would do my best to treasure her every day I was entrusted to her. I passed out on my futon that night, feeling crushed in parts of my heart I had not known existed. As dawn arrived, so too did my friend Steve, and a worn-out Honda Accord to take me to Baltimore, Maryland. Steve had invited me with him to visit his family back in Maryland, and thinking 35 hours of travel time in 2 days wasn't enough, I got in a car defeated and deflated for another 36 hours on the road. It was exactly what I needed, as my phone received neither a call nor a text from the woman who held my affections. Hours turned into eons, but then, after 4 long days of silence, my phone rang. The interrupting ring carried on its wave words that would forever end my life as a single man. I was in the living room of Steve's family home when the ring came, and as I looked at the screen, I saw her name appear. Keeping my composure cooler than a cucumber, but freaking out inside, I answered it, "Hey." Then followed the silence of awkward replies. We talked about my trip out to Maryland, but when the conversation took the turn towards finality, she said, "So I have prayed about it and spent a great deal of time preparing to answer your question. My answer is this: yes, and when is our first adventure date?" Squealing like a yo-yo champion, I high-fived myself while jumping in place. Coming back to the phone, I suavely replied with a day and a time, and we agreed. Hanging up the phone in Steve's family living room, I knew things were different, but I could never have known what the woman on the other end of that phone would ultimately mean to me. Our summer adventures now turned to dating and delight, and as Chelsea and I grew to know one another, it quickly became clear that this woman was every bit the woman of character I had perceived her to be. Soon one date turned into 2, and I knew she was my treasure, my delight, my radiant maiden, walking in a meadow on a starry night. Into this love-struck tale of boy meets girl would come our first taste of the shadow of death. It was our 7th adventure date, where we were about to have our first lesson as a couple of what lurked in the darkness. I had taken her to one of my favorite places, a hiking trail in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We walked, hands clutched together, up the pitch-black path. The overgrowth was hiding the moonlight, so we decided to sit on a small bridge spanning a bubbling creek. We sat and told stories as young lovers do, when I heard a pop, soft but noticeable, and then the smallest twig break and leaf crunch. I asked her to be quiet, and within a minute it moved again. Soft, padded feet were inching their way through the darkness. They were deliberate steps on the softest patches of earth between the predator and its prey. In the dark brush, just a few yards away crouched a lion, waiting to steal away our peaceful moment of bliss and kill us before we've shared our first kiss. I whispered as I stood her on her feet, "A mountain lion is coming. We need to move." I kept facing the creature faintly more than a tan shape in the forest beyond the bridge. We made our way to a clearing that would give us enough open space to see the predator stalking us in the darkness. Peace washed over me as a scripture came to my mind, and to Adam was given dominion over the creatures of the earth. I wrapped her in my arms and pulled her close. I kept my eyes down the trail where death was waiting to end our future before it could begin. I prayed for the woman who would one day become my wife. I prayed against the darkness and the creature that sought our demise. I thanked him that he will hide us under the shadow of his wings, and we need not fear even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The cinching cord of fear that was settling over our necks snapped under the cutting power of the word of truth. Incorruptible, undefeatable courage and boldness welled up from within my spirit, and I knew the battle was over. In a moment, the lion retreated and returned to the shadows, not defeated, only turned away for a little while, waiting for a more opportune time. The omen of that night faded from our minds as the excitement of new love bloomed in us both. While I pursued Chelsea, I spent a great deal of time writing things down, as well as rat-holing keepsakes from our dates. Things like a crushed pine cone she had turned into an otter-looking creature, or the first piece of origami she ever folded for me. Every keepsake was a memory of the first glimpses into the heart of the woman I adore. While we grew in our dating relationship, the Lord told me Chelsea was the woman he had prepared for me, and me for her. As such, I knew I needed to ask the woman I loved if she would follow me as we followed our Savior every day for the rest of our lives. After receiving the blessing of her father and mother, I set about my grand adventure to propose to Chelsea. With weeks of planning and the help of my friends, we sprung our caper onto the woman who would become my bride. Working with another couple of friends of ours, we tricked Chelsea into thinking we had an elaborate scavenger hunt for Chelsea and our friend Kelly to complete. We set up an entire false-ish scavenger hunt for Kelly, who played her part beautifully, convincing Chelsea she too was so surprised by the lengths her boyfriend had gone to plant their curious clues and treasures. While Chelsea and Kelly bounced around a snow-covered landscape, I furiously prepared the final touches back at the clues' finish line. The clues for Chelsea led her to places like the house where we had first met, or to the top of a 130-year-old spiral staircase where we first held hands. Chelsea's second to the last clue led her to a small lake where she had first whispered her words of liking to me while we were climbing Kids Play Fort at 3 a.m. Unfortunately, the mood was shattered when a loudspeaker screamed at us that we were trespassing in the park and the cops had been called. Our car had been parked miles away, so we ran like rascals in the night. We didn't get far before the police arrived and we had to run into the brush to hide. When the squad car's spotlight shone around the lake, we buried our heads in the cover of our 4-foot-tall stalks of grass. After slipping away from the heat, we spent hours laughing about the lengths I would go for a one-of-a-kind adventure date. After finding the final clue, she made her way to the front door of our place. Stepping up to the door, Kelly pushed Chelsea inside and promptly shut the door behind her. My roommates and I had spent the better part of 2 days moving every bit of furniture out of the house. Into the void were brought hundreds of candles and floral arrangements lining a path of lights, leading her deeper into the house. As she walked deeper in, she saw through our relationship, for along with the flowers, there were my journal pages of words about her, as well as photographs from our last year and a half together. Stashed alongside these were dozens of my little trinkets and keepsakes. I laid before Chelsea every memory I cherished of her and me. I did this not only for her to see what I saw when I spoke her name or thought of her hand clutched between my fingers, but I did this also to sear into my mind the relationship I had only ever dreamed of having. She was the only woman I wanted to share my life with, and I had the hope of being honored to lead her in my love and devotion to the Redeemer all the days of our life. As she wound through the house, she came around the corner where I had been hiding, waiting on one knee. When I saw her, I began to shake uncontrollably, and before I could say a word of the months-long prepared proposal speech, she did the one thing I had not prepared for. She sat on my knee and clutched my neck. She clutched around my neck, weeping on my shoulder, hugging me, and whispering words reserved for her and me alone. I sobbed on her neck as I stuttered through my proposal of marriage to the woman I adored. She said yes to my proposal, and we celebrated with a feast at a real seafood restaurant that cost me weeks of my meager pay. But as anyone who has ever been head over ridiculous heels in love can tell you, love like that knows nothing of cost. It knows only of longing, devotion, sacrifice, and dedication. The crazy love I have for Chelsea is but a shadow of the love our Father has for us. It is but a mere glimmer of the great physician's sacrificial love for each one of his. That seafood dinner was the best meal of my entire life, but honestly, I could not tell you a single thing I ate. I was feasting on the joy and excitement of a future life lived with Chelsea. People in love radiate such attractive joy, people can't help but smile and be filled with encouragement by their presence. We glowed in our excitement, and we could not wait for the moment we would get to know the fullness of the perceived bounty to come in our marriage. Chelsea and I, but really just Chelsea, spent the next few months arranging everything for our day of covenant vows. Then in July, Chelsea walked with her father around a blooming rose bush in a garden meadow. I saw my bride for the first time. She was more beautiful than any woman who has graced the earth with her presence. Chelsea was dressed in white, but clothed in purity. I had made a vow to her father when I had first asked to pursue his daughter that I would honor and respect Chelsea's sexual purity in every way until he gave her away to me on our wedding day. Although I'd failed to maintain total purity in many of my previous relationships, it was a vow that by the grace of God and by biblical wisdom-led boundaries, I was able to keep. Chelsea and I were so thankful to be able to offer each other our bodies in purity. Though we had sinned throughout our lives, God had preserved this gift in us, and it is a miraculous testimony to God's grace for even his wandering children. After we made a covenant with God before our family and our friends, Chelsea and I celebrated our marriage with the people we loved. While dining on some forgotten food, I ate the second best meal of my life while sharing my first meal with my wife. We ate, we drank, and we rejoiced at the gift of the abundant relationship we had received. We feasted that night not only on food, but on each other's love, and we drank deep the blessings of marriage. When I read over my journals from this time, I cannot help but feel the depths of joy, excitement, and explosive peace. But as our marriage progressed that first year, Chelsea and I learned Jesus must be the only one we ever seek our fulfillment in. As much as Chelsea and I loved each other, we found how much we had sought from the other things that can only be seen in our relationship with the Messiah. We struggled immensely as we realized the depths of the idolization we each had for the other, as well as the depths of sin's unwashed stain can have on each other. However, during this time, we grew into an understanding of two becoming one that has reshaped my concepts of what love is, as well as how truly selfish I can be. If the first year of our marriage had been hard, the years to come would become unbearable. Chelsea and I were about to face the impossible. The lion was stalking us once more. It was about to strike, and this time the blow would lead to the death of a passionate, joyful man. Chapter 4, Things to Come. The shadows would grow deep. They would set upon us as quickly as a bolt of lightning finding its way through the thick clouds above. The screams, the terrors of the night, the haunting need to run from something I could not see. The night is still upon us. I feel Chelsea's cold hands upon my pounding, sweat-peppered chest. She's quiet but reassuring. My gasps and screams are fading into the controlled rhythm of a calm, desperately clawing its way back into my body. They are back. They were those shapes of horror, those visions of death. The darkened men are there, and the monsters too, holding onto small ankles and wrists, the pain and the searing of flesh, and then nothing. Always nothing. We've been married for 1.5 years now. The first year was nothing close to the honeymoon we'd thought it would be. Instead, the bondage of my past came with me. There aren't enough words to describe the pain of what came next. Who could know it? Who could understand the gut-churning, heart-rending pain? Widows know. They know it all too well. Some widows lost their mates even though warm, familiar bodies still occupy the space next to them at night. It is the devastation of losing the love of your life. Losing the good and the bad too, but so much of the good went into the void of blackness just after 12 months. Memories of a lifetime seemed to be flushed down the drain, and I was left with a shallow pond of confusion and no one to tell me what to do next. It wasn't overnight, but within a few short months of our 1-year anniversary, I went from being Nate to someone else. A man Chelsea had never met, a man who did not have the insatiable passion for exploring this world, for finding the gardens of beauty hidden in plain sight. I used to see so much joy in even the smallest of things, like pebbles or acorns scattered across the freshly mowed grass, the sound of water falling from one rock to another, or the cold touch of Chelsea's fingers knit between my own. I had memories of walking down the streets of Rocky Mountain towns, snacking on snickerdoodle cookies, and then feeding deer popcorn to her great surprise. They were such sweet delights. The warmth in my chest was a fire for her, a love that knew no limits and could not be restrained. Our shared dreams for the future filled with our children laughing as we walked down the paths of tomorrows. All of it, every scrap of bliss, was washed down the drain of a monster called forgetting. Who am I? The words passed my lips as I stared into a mirror, desperate to recognize the face looking back at me. My hair had been cut short. My brown, wavy, shoulder-length hair, once so recognizable, had been cut back and styled. Business casual attire now covered what had always been tight-fitting t-shirts, or none at all, flip-flops and shorts. There was now a razor-sharp knife strapped to my chest. It never left my body, ever. I hungered for its nearness. I desired it more than food in my belly or water down my throat. The need for sharpened steel to be in arm's reach was a primal, insatiable craving. Soon there were pistols under pillows and burner cell phones with bundles of money stashed in puzzling places. There were secret caches of supplies buried under uprooted trees and boulders hundreds of miles from home. I no longer enjoyed the day, but instead I craved the night, when the world slept, and I restlessly made my way into the familiar cracks and shadows of alleys and backyards. I found my fingers turning everyday items into tools for a forgotten shadowy hunt. I was a stranger to myself. I didn't know where they found this man in the mirror, but he was not me. If he was not me, then who was this face staring back at me? Who was the man in the mirror? What do you tell your wife when you change your name, your passions, your hobby, and everything she's ever known you as? What do you do when you don't remember your best friend's name, the church you'd served at for 7 years, or the place you used to work? Where do you go when the memories in your mind are now clouded with shadows of things you'd never known? What do you do when you have schematics and plans for weapons, missions, and tools you'd hardly touched, used, or heard of filling your mind? Where there once used to be memories of soccer games and high school pranks, there was now the need to plan and prepare for scenarios of chaos unleashing themselves upon the world. What would you do if you woke up to a stranger in the mirror standing in a body decades after you'd seen it last? No one had ever told me there was more than a me in this mind, that there could be a we. The truth is, I was a man of many. One body stuffed with many broken pieces of a systematically shattered soul. But that truth was still a vapor passing through the fingers of forgotten memories. I did the best I could with the confusion of a past I didn't remember. I dumped the real contents of my memories into a 5-gallon bucket and buried it in the basement. I took the pictures of a man named Nate and shoved them in a shoebox left on a dusty shelf. I found the keepsakes and the knickknacks of dates with Chelsea and stuffed them in corners of totes and left them for a time when someone else who cared about them might resurface and love them again. I couldn't face them because they weren't my memories, so how could I keep them around? They haunted me and confused me more than I could understand. Instead, I pressed into the fringe corners of society where I found the itch between my shoulders finally get scratched. I prepared for the end of the world I knew was coming. The end, somehow, I always knew I was made for, where monsters battle men, engines of chaos from the days of old surface to sift the wheat from the tares. I remembered things that were lost in the years, while Nate was running our life. Soon Chelsea could plainly see something very different in me. When we would go out together, I went by a new name, Jason. I had a new first name, middle, and last. All of it was there. As Jason, I could remember police and first responder scander frequencies, give out dozens of different identities, everything from social security numbers to other mothers' maiden names, and where I went to elementary school in a small Midwestern town I'd never heard of. There wasn't the faintest concern with morality, and laws were only applicable to those who did not understand how to use them for their gain. When I would step out the door, there was an entirely different person ready for me whenever I needed to fade into the shadows and disappear from prying eyes. Jason could remember the way to hide from surveillance cameras, license plate scanners, and how to melt into the crowds. He could shift from one person to another, a chameleon able to fade into the emotional surroundings of the people he was with. He remembered how to make bullets that fragment and ones that pierce through hardened targets or reinforced windows. He could weave fabrics that cloak signals and conceal digital footprints. He remembered how to hone an edge on steel that will pop the hairs off his arm with the slightest touch. He remembered how to lose a tail and scramble his messages into code that could only be read with a cipher locked in his mind. So much to remember, and yet I forgot how to love the woman I was married to, and our marriage was falling apart ever so slowly. She woke up to a stranger. His name was Nathan, and though he had the same body as the man who stood with arms wrapped tight around her just a few years ago, there was something different in his voice and in the way he held her hand. He trembled and startled when she touched him. He shied away from her. The touch seemed to burn him. He did not desire her. His apathy was poisoning their dreams. Their shared desire for children now became hers alone. Instead, he was terrified at the mere thought of this. With the throwing of some hidden switch, happily ever after faded into the sunset of someone else's dreams. I so badly wanted to love her. Honestly, the longing I had to understand what was going on was there, but it was intentionally hushed down to a whisper. I longed to crave her embrace, but every touch felt like needles pricking exposed nerves. We kept up our charade, we played the part of a couple, but our intimacy was non-existent, and my addictions and bondage built and grew. I ran to my familiar addictions of substances and porn, dark passengers who had poisoned my life since I was a child. At impossibly young ages, I was made familiar with sexual perversions no child should know. The incestuous abuse had defiled me long ago. The need to alter my state of mind was insatiable. I could not bear the present. The past was a void full of terror, death, and pain. I chose to avoid it like the plague it was. With a prescribed pill, I could slip away and fade into the oblivion I craved. The guilt would come with the sobriety, the dread of shame for my lusts, which could not be satisfied. Small victories would come. Sometimes there would be weeks strung together where I found miraculous freedom in rivers of the Father's peace. Then the raft of my life would crash into a boulder of terror, the dread of forgotten memories. Back to those poisons I would go. I had been sober from alcohol for years, but one addiction would be conquered only to have another substance take its place. I went from alcohol to prescription pills for the chronic pain, and soon other substances that were along the graying edge of socially acceptable. I was a man desperate to escape. I was a man who needed to hide from the madness of memories that felt like they belonged to another. Who would save me? Who could save me? The prayers I prayed were sincere. No amount of time spent in churches could save me. No amount of 2 a.m. prayers for forgiveness gave me relief. What I feared more than the guilt, the shame, or the apathy of my marriage was the dreams. I had too many dreams that were ripe with killing and death. The dreams of daggers plunged through kidneys and slid behind Adam's apples and then tearing out throats. The chanting of things I did not understand and vomiting after wretched acts of killing was through. What were they? Oh God, what was this I saw in the night, in the stillness, while my wife slept beside me? Who were these people I saw over and over, a child sneaking into manicured, high-fenced estates and slipping between security passes? Why did I see a wolf, this creature stalking me in my sleep? There were so many questions, and yet there were never any answers. I drowned the mysteries into oblivion. I hid them with vials and pills. Then nothing happened when I slept, and I passed from awake to asleep to awake again. I went to work, and later when I got home, Chelsea and I watched TV shows that temporarily filled our house with laughter or scratched the itch of boredom until we went to sleep and did it again. Scattered into these days were random get-togethers with my dad. Out of nowhere, he would invite me to stay with him in the mountains or in the deserts of that hellish place. Memories would fade with every trip, and I would return even more of a shell of the man I'd left as. Chelsea noticed but said nothing. What could she say? What could explain the change that she saw in me? What could bring understanding to this madness of our life? On and on we went. The lion of destruction had found my throat and left Nate perishing in the depths of our broken past. But Yahweh. 2 words. But Yahweh. 2 words which change everything. At this moment, just as he had done so many times in the past and will do even more in the future, the God of mercy interjects himself into the scene. He reaches his mighty right hand into the depths of our death and sows in a seed of life. The seed comes with 7 letters etched on its surface. Answers. Answers were on their way. They would not come quickly at first. At first, they would be a trickle, a pebble tossed into our pond of confusion, rippling out for a moment before the waters grew placid again. One by one, he would drop them into the waters and let us contend and recover from the little ripples. Soon those ripples turned to waves of curiosity, and our need to know and understand built into a pang of hunger that exceeded the cravings for escape, secret caches, and even the blade. The answers to come would set Chelsea and me on a path to freedom and understanding. No one warned me the path to life was established firmly in the midst of a war-torn landscape. Where we were headed was a ruinous land through the valley of the shadow of death, beneath the waves. The answers were not abundant, not at first. I was a man on fire, and I needed something to quench my thirst. He came to us with wisdom and truth. The God of our redemption was coming through. We stepped onto the shores of the lake, its waters stilled to a glass. Carefully chipped stones were in my fingers. They are called chert, a flint-like stone used by the Native Americans who lived here long ago. They treasured these stones and knocked the rock's hardened surfaces into useful tools like arrowheads, scrapers, and blades. They are thick and red, burnt after their useful edges had been worn smooth. I was watching the waters and waiting. I was holding on to the icy fragments of a memory, which chilled my soul. I was hoping it would pass and move on, but it lingered. It lingered on the fringes of forgetting the place where no man hopes to be. The pain, the hurt, the sorrows. I just wanted to weep, but the tears fled from me. They were hidden away in the memories. I drove back to the waters of a lake in the rocky forests up in the mountains at nearly 9,000 feet high. I worked here for a summer, a winter, and a fall. These were the waters where the answers started. Hours-long commute day in and day out gave me the ability to start listening, to have space to be quiet and left alone. The drive up the canyons would wind through more than rivers and dirt roads. They would wind through the canals of chaos peppering my past. It was there I began to hear the truth. I started to know what it was I had come through. Not all of it, just a whisper. But the whisper was peace, understanding, and truth. I saw then that redemption was coming for me. I stuffed the rocks deep into my pocket and walked on. I scanned the edge of the shoreline, praying as I went, asking the Father to make clear to me the reason for it all. I needed to know what I forgot. I needed to know what it was that made me crave these secret places or to explore the caverns and dark depths. I walked on the grasses and pine needles growing thicker along the shore. I stepped into the soggy soil, and the water pressed over my boot and soaked in. Its icy tendrils ensnared the soles of my feet before clawing onto my toes. For 2 years, I had feared the waters that once brought me relief. Our first year of marriage, I was so in love. I craved her, and I longed to know her. Yet looking at this face staring back from the waters of this lake, I hated that none of it was there anymore. I didn't understand why I couldn't love her or plunge into these waters and explore their depths. There was nothing I loved more than swimming. The feeling of peace would wash over me when my head was in the depths. For months, I prepared for dives, holding onto boulders and running beneath the surface. I would hold onto lead weights, and Chelsea even had bought me an old cannonball so I could do it more efficiently. I named that old cannonball Earl. I took him with me to every one of my classes 1 year back in college. I would hold onto him and run laps underwater in apartment complex pools I had let myself into. Some apartment complexes were not so thrilled to have a man running laps underwater in their pools and were less than amiable at my endeavors for peace. I needed the water. I needed to hold myself down there for just a minute longer, to feel the silence settle into my soul, to feel the warmth of the sun on my shoulders grow cool as I sank 1 foot deeper and deeper still. I learned to shallow dive into rivers and creeks and enjoyed the thrill and the rush of landing with inches to spare. I craved it more than the air. That summer with Steve back in Baltimore, I dove headfirst nearly 40 feet into a quarry I'd never seen before. The first time I landed wrong, the second time even worse. Steve's sister panicked as she neared the edge and turned backward after already starting her leap. Her older brother had reached out and caught her as she tumbled towards the rocks. A spiny shrub with exposed roots had stayed her fall. Cut elbows, knuckles, and wrists were all she had to show for it. Jumping into action, we'd made a human chain and pulled her back. Then I had them break into ones and twos as we ran from the cops that got called on us for the innocent trespass. Chelsea and I had honeymooned on the coast of Mexico, where we laughed for days and swam in the waters. We were two lovers lost in new romance. I had left her on the boiling beach while I went out for a swim. I looked at her and smiled, waiting for her to join me. She drank on the shoreline, and as I was 100 yards from shore, pumping my legs and feeling joy inexpressible, a tragedy occurred. I flicked my fingers as I broke the surface, and my 3-day-old wedding ring shot off into the ocean. I plunged my head into the waves, hoping to grab it before it fell the 20 feet to the churning sand below. There was no sign of it, and as I surfaced, I fixed my eyes on a focal shore point and began my search. I could not fathom leaving it behind, so I dove again and again. I spent minutes on the bottom until my lungs screamed, threatening to gulp in the salty sea. I could not return to Chelsea empty-handed with some ominous sign marking the beginning of our marriage lost. Again, I dove into the depths, passing my fingers and fretful gaze over rusty bottle caps, rocks, and shell fragments. The ring was made of tungsten, so surely it had sunk deep, and the waves were creating new sandbars and ripples every moment I lingered. Beyond my moment of fear, I began to pray. I found faith welling up as I had asked the Father to grant me a miracle. Within my spirit, a story soared above my fear, a miracle of God for another ordinary man who was in need. The story comes from 2 Kings, chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, where the men are cutting wood in the forest near the Jordan River. One of the men is swinging his iron axe, chopping into trees that will provide his family a home. The iron axe suddenly flies off its handle and sinks into the roiling waters. Crying out to Elisha, he asks the prophet of Yahweh to help recover it, as it was borrowed. Elisha, guided by the distressed man to the spot in the river, takes a stick and drops it into the water, and up floats the iron axe head. There is no elaboration in the story, it's more of a footnote than a focal point, but thousands of years later this story was centered in my mind. I knew it and believed the God of Elisha could still make iron axes or tungsten rings float. Back in the waves, I dove with faith, fueling my search, and he provided me a miracle. Scanning the bottoms, I passed over a few bottle caps and a piece of broken bottle until there on the surface of a rippled, sandy bottom was my partially submerged wedding ring. Grabbing hold of it, I let loose bubbles of belief, knowing my God provides and still cares about the little things, like floating axe heads and wedding rings. Chelsea immortalized that moment with her pen and paper a few weeks later. Those were the memories lost in the tote I'd buried away. I had looked through them the morning before coming up to the lake. They were my memories, but not really. Ever since that summer, I'd be scared to go underwater at all. Scared to take more than a few strokes beneath the surface. The panic within would build to a crescendo. I would ache, I would scream, and my heart would nearly burst with terror. Their words echo within. No, we are drowning. We are going to drown. I just wanted to swim again. I wanted to be in the water to explore the depths and find buried treasures or lost axe heads, but fear, so haunting I could taste it, kept me back. The fear hid me beneath its knuckles, grinding me into pieces like the shirt in my pocket. I wanted to weep so badly, I just wanted to cry, to bury my face in the waters and let my tears mingle in the midst of ancient memories. But I couldn't, so I didn't, and I walked on the soggy boot leaking my failure on my way back home. Home to the woman I didn't remember, unable to conquer the fears I'd brought with me to these shores. The days would go like this in an endless cycle, but I was an expert at escaping, a man ever on the run. I would wander in the mountains looking for treasures now forgotten in time. I would explore old mine shafts from the 1800s. I would dig up rotting ruins with timbers cut by trappers and men desperate for gold. I would find bullets buried in the wood, nails forged on an anvil and squared on the edges. I would add these little treasures to my collection, a place in the front yard I named Nate's Beach. Nate may have fallen prey to that lion in the darkness, but somewhere deep in my soul, the echoes of his passion still sang a sad melody. I gathered my trinkets and left them in a 3-foot section of our garden just in front of our door. Soon the pile grew with old bowling balls, chunks of pottery, and blue hand-blown glass, once containing fragrances favorable to a woman 200 years lost. They were the remnants of lifetimes I'd never lived. They were snapshots from a time when they once mattered to men. Some were snapshots from my own time, like an antler from a survival expedition I'd led in the mountains up north. Dozens of seashells from the Sea of Cortez, the Atlantic, and Pacific Oceans peppered the ground. Sands from the shores of 14 beaches and sea glass, which had been tumbled from jagged to soft by thousands of waves, leaving them without their edges and cuts. His waves were about to pound upon the jagged edges of my hardened heart. The pebbles he tossed into my pond of confusion were about to become boulders, and soon tsunamis of remembering would tumble my rough edges smooth. Nate's speech bore witness to the 3 sentences that finally made me strong enough to face down the mountains of madness and murder waiting in my past. That beach served to pull on the threads of this mystery and help me to unravel the lies, the deception, and the threats. A miracle named Grace. The end of the age of deceit would begin with words. Soon after walking upon those shores and driving home with a soggy boot, I did a dangerous thing. I put my fingers to these black and white keys and wrote down memories I had spent my whole life trying to forget. I obeyed my Redeemer's pressing to put the pieces of my shattered past into written form. The words came in a torrent, thousands upon thousands, and then tens of thousands as parts of my soul seeped from their sorrow-filled swamps and told their tale. It was the first time I ever wrote about the incest and the family friends with their lusts. Even as I attempted to write, I soon realized how vulnerable and painfully naked I felt. I could not bear to write in an exposed place. There was a need to hide myself, to tuck myself away as I wrote these destructive words. In walked my safe harbor, Chelsea, the providence of the Father's goodness evident in my wife. She built me a nook. She made me a fort in our spare bedroom where we painted scripture on the walls, and she could craft freely. She took sheets and strings and ropes and built me a nook you had to wind your way into. She made me a space that I could write in, tucked away from the world. A hiding place. It was a shelter of refuge I'd never known. We named it Hawk's Haven. In Hawk's Haven, I would let the depths of my soul surface and leak upon the page. I would wail, I would sob, not as a man, but as a child, as a boy who'd lost his innocence and never had a say in the matter. I would crawl out of the nook, realizing there was peace in speaking the truth. There was healing in tears and in the surrender of secrets to the author of hope, the great Redeemer Jesus. I found so much freedom in those early days. The pain was there, but I found the burden bearer present like never before. I found freedom building in my chest, yet the addictions lingered, the memories and voids still tormented my sleep. I wrestled with the invisible forces of myself and lost every time. I was not willing to let go until I received a blessing. I held on for dear life, knowing there was only death if I let go. I clung to that hope. Desperately, I dug my claws into the Word of God and begged Him to reveal to me what I needed to see to be free. I asked Him to heal me. I could not redeem myself. I could not save myself or my marriage, and I did not know how much longer I could take it, let alone how much longer she could. My father, my true father, knew. He had always known me and had answered my prayers so long ago. It was in fall of 2015 that our blessing came. It took a miracle to save this running man, and our miracle's name is Naomi Grace. She was entrusted to Chelsea and me even though for years we could not conceive. My abuse had rendered me damaged in ways we had been told and believed would make children a near impossibility. There is one and only one God of the impossible, and His name is holy. His name is righteous. Yahweh, Elohim, the Lord our God, was not content for our life to be one forever filled with death. No, He's not willing that any should perish. He was the giver of our life, and it was time for us to be entrusted with a new life to help us face the death of our past and find hope burning brighter than darkness. Chelsea filmed the moment as we stood in our little bathroom, realizing we would no longer just be a husband and wife, but were something that I'd never truly known. We were going to be a family. 2 hearts once beating now held a third. A precious daughter was growing and developing within my wife, and as sure as the sun sets over the mountains, in 10 months' time she would be in our arms. The excitement faded as the fear-laced thoughts began to flood my mind. They were packed with pain, dread, and self-doubt, and the weight of their pressure drove me to my knees. The next morning, I found my face in the carpet as I sobbed and screamed, knowing I had no idea how to be a father. Just that morning on our way home with the pregnancy test, I'd confessed to Chelsea how I'd fallen back into my addiction with pornography. The tattered threads of our marriage could not bear the burdens of my bondage, let alone fatherhood. I knew I was not ready, but I believed if He'd entrusted Chelsea and I with Naomi, He would provide me what I needed to be a father. In the salt and pepper fibers of my bedroom's floor, I prayed with faith-riddled desperation. Father, heal me. Please just heal me, whatever it takes. I meant it with every fiber of my being. I needed to be a better husband, and even more so a better father than I'd ever known. I knew if I continued on my current path, I would bring my addictions into fatherhood, and I could not bear the idea of that. So instead, I set my jaw like flint and admitted my weakness and called upon the name above every name and received strength for the impossible journey being prepared for us. If you told me that morning what was coming in the next 2 years, I would have run as far as fast as possible. I would have run to my familiar creature comforts and buried my head in the sands of forgetting. This time, however, I had something to fuel the furnace of my fires, to give me the unshakable and unbreakable courage to face the loss of friends and family, the threats, the intimidation, the attempted assassinations, and the fury birthed in generations of bloodshed coming to hunt us down. That fuel was something I'd never known. It was the Father's love. His light-filled, salt-stained truth was the untainted, unadulterated, and unconditional love I needed to become set free. I needed a father who would not curse me, coerce me, control me, or sell my body, spirit, and soul to grow in power and wealth. No, this father's love and justice was the most potent weapon I'd ever been given, for with it I would face the powers and persons who'd shattered my soul and made me a monster, a murderer, and a man of many. With it, I would find freedom in remembering, freedom in the grieving, and then one day I would find freedom in forgiving. In order for the healing to begin, I would have to take a drive down to Texas, where my faith would become my sight.